Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight and watching the stream. And thank you for Jeff for coming and presenting for us. Jeff's going to be talking about what's new in .NET 5. Jeff works for Microsoft, and he is a Twitch streamer. You can normally catch him several times a week at his Twitch channel, C# Fritz. Jeff, take it away.
Hey there, friends. Can you hear us? How we doing? Can you hear us all right out there? How's it going? Do we sound? I see somebody saying audio. How we doing? Looking for something from the chat room. All right. Just double check. Yeah, we hearing this? Yeah, there we go. I got it. All right. So, how's it going there, friends? My name is Jeff Fritz. I am a program manager on the .NET team with a focus on community interactions, training, workshops, and helping out at some of the Microsoft events that you've heard of, Build, Ignite, .NET Conf. I work on all those things, and I specialize in producing and delivering live video, like right here on Twitch. I want to talk to you today about what's new in .NET 5. .NET 5 was just released. It was just announced at .NET Conf. .NET Conf it was the first virtual conference that we hosted through Microsoft, and it was MVC Conf how many years ago, and then .NET Conf, ASP Conf at one point. And we've been doing this event virtually online for 10 years. You can find new events. We're running them now once a quarter for a day. And every November, you're going to see us with a 3-day event running and hosting community folks talking about all the cool new things going on in .NET. So the big thing that we announced and we released was .NET 5. General availability of the new version of .NET. No longer is it .NET Core. No longer is it .NET Standard. It's .NET 5. What's that mean? What do we get out of this? So we get single file applications, smaller container images, and everybody likes smaller Docker containers. Nobody wants to be toting around a couple hundred meg of Docker container. No, we want something nice and small that we can push around, update, and load up with the things that we need, just our applications. There's been significant web and cloud investments. We want to make sure that you have a great experience building natively for the cloud, especially if you're going to deploy to that blue cloud that we at Microsoft tend to favor so much. Windows desktop environment, we get development enhancements, Windows ARM64 support. Oh my gosh, so you can build for all those smaller, faster Windows machines. Continued performance improvements in .NET 5 builds on what we've accomplished in .NET Core 3.1. It's the fastest platform out there for you. C# 9, F# 5 language features. Check out more. You can get .NET 5 at .NET/get.NET5. All right, and I do have the chat room up here. So if there are any questions, please drop a line in the chat room. I'm happy to pause and answer your questions as I go along here, because this is about your questions. This isn't about me dictating and reading what's on a set of slides and showing you a bunch of demos. I want to make sure that you get the .NET 5 info you need to be successful. All right. Now, .NET adoption has grown significantly. We've got 5 million .NET developers. Those are monthly active developers that use the Visual Studio family of products. Visual Studio 2019, Visual Studio for Mac, and Visual Studio Code. There's 200,000 WinForms and WPF developers now on .NET Core that have migrated over to .NET Core 3.1 and are building with WinForms and WPF. There are 230,000 first-time .NET developers using .NET Core as of September 2020. And more than 2 million Linux publishes a month from Visual Studio. That's amazing. right? The growth and the access to .NET on the Linux platform continues to happen, continues to expand. We're really excited about seeing .NET on Linux. So we had a lot of ideas where we wanted to go with .NET 5. Coming out of .NET Core 3.1, we're going to drop the core naming. We're going to rename this to .NET 5. How do we get there? What's that look like? Can we talk a little bit more about what that means? So our vision was to have one .NET. At the time of .NET Core 3.1, we had a .NET Framework version 4.8, .NET Core 3.1, and our Mono and Xamarin investments. Now, we wanted to bring all those together and just have .NET. One .NET, .NET 5 to .NET 6 in this wave of adoption and change. We want a single software development kit, a single command line tool that you can use that is able to build for all those different application types, whether it's Windows applications, web applications, cloud applications, IoT applications, games with Mono, mobile with Xamarin, one tool chain that lets you do all of it. Cross-platform native user interface, cross-platform web user interface, cloud-native investments, continued improvements in speed, size, diagnostics, integration with Azure services, so you have the best cloud experience using Microsoft Azure. And we wanted .NET to be the best of breed solution for all modern web development workloads. That's where we wanted. We didn't quite get there. What does that actually mean? Let's break this down. What happened to get to .NET 5? Because 5 and 6 are really coupled together here. So we had .NET Framework 4.8, .NET Core 3.1, Mono and Xamarin. What we ended up with is we said, you know what, .NET Framework, no more features, only fixes. It's part of Windows. So that's fine. That's good. We can park that and say it's working quite well with Windows, and we'll adapt it as need be for fixes to keep it running well on Windows and to support Windows investments. However, .NET Core 3.1, let's evolve that. We'll turn it into .NET Core 4, and we'll merge Mono and Xamarin into that so that we end up with just one .NET at that point. And really, .NET, when you think about .NET Core 4, well, we've already got a .NET Framework 4.8. It's kind of confusing to have two .NETs at the same numbering. You're going to go out and you're going to search for these things, and you're going to go, wait a sec, which one is it? Which one am I using? That's confusing. So we decided to rebrand it and say, you know what, we'll call it .NET 5 to help a little bit with search engine optimization, to make it a little bit easier to discover and to make it unique and set apart, to show that it is an evolution over .NET Framework 4.8 and .NET Core 3.1. And pandemic happened. And the complexity of what we wanted to make happen with Mono and Xamarin for .NET 5 was a little much. So since we had to send everybody back to their respective homes to work from and be isolated, we said, you know what, let's take this opportunity to make sure we do this right. We push it out, and we said we're going to inject Mono and Xamarin in .NET 6 when we release that in 2021. What's not in .NET 5? What didn't make it? What things are not there, and what is there, and where can we go forward from this? App domains didn't make it. Remoting, web forms, WCF, server, Windows workflow, those are on .NET Framework only. And really, there's good reasons for all those when you see what the replacements are. We went from app domains to assembly load context. It slimmed down the amount of ceremony. We went from remoting to named pipes and gRPC. We think is a much better modern solution when you need to make those remote procedure calls. Web forms is was originally an attempt to work with and make Visual Basic 6 developers successful with the web with very stateful applications. We think Blazor fills that quite nicely and provides that same component-based user interface. WCF Server migrates very nicely to gRPC as well. And there is an open source community project called Core WCF. There's a link to it right there on the screen. They're not quite ready for prime time. They're still investing. They're still building for it, but they're coming along. And there's also for workflow, Windows workflow, there is an open source community project, Core WF, and you can see a link to it right there. So I recommend you check those out. There's definitely some place that those are going. We think that they're going to be successful. WCF server, the open core WCF and core WF, we think can really be something going forward. So we also wanted to simplify things. We wanted to make sure that getting into .NET 5, you didn't have all these different names, all these different framework monikers you had to track to do all these different things. Let's get down to just one. So we have .NET 5.0, and that's going to be the code that works everywhere. If you're building an application and you need to reference the framework you're using .NET 5.0. However, if you need to build operating system specific projects, so things like Windows Forms applications, WPF, iOS and Android in the future, we're going to put -Windows or -Android -iOS for those operating system specific projects. This way, it's very clear that that project is only going to build and run on just that operating system. And we think this gives you the best of both worlds. You get to still target .NET 5, but when you need those extensions appropriate for those operating systems, you can reference and bring those in by just slightly changing the name of the framework you're using. So what's this mean then as far as our naming scheme? You're always going to have netx.y. So .NET 5 is .NET 5.0. If we need to release a 5.1, it'll be .NET 5.1. And we'll have appropriately the operating system supported framework monikers of .NET 5.0-Windows, .NET 5.0-Android, .NET 5.0-iOS, whatever it may be. That's pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to follow, and makes sense. It doesn't confuse people when you see those various names. Now, .NET Core App 3.1, .NET Standard 2.1, they're going to get rolled up. The next version of those is .NET 5.0. Now, what does Microsoft target? As we're building and working through our libraries and frameworks, which frameworks do we target when we build things? So all of our cross-platform libraries like ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework Core, eventually all the system packages and most libraries that are shared across .NET will target .NET 5.0. Windows controls for WinForms, WPF, and the managed UWP controls, those are Windows resources. They're going to be in .NET 5.0-Windows. Now, those cross-platform abstractions for mobile, Xamarin Essentials, Xamarin Forms, .NET MAUI, or any other cross-platform abstraction, those are going to be .NET 5.0 because they're cross-platform. Now, we may also have some operating system specific frameworks that provide specific implementations for those, but for the most part, you're going to see .NET 5.0 is the target framework we go after. Anything else that you see Microsoft build that needs to also work on .NET Framework, we're going to target .NET Standard 2.0. That's the .NET Standard version that works with both .NET 5 and .NET Framework 4.8. This way you get great compatibility across both sets of .NET frameworks because you do have those things that are tightly coupled to Windows that make sense to build with .NET Framework, and you're going to be able to target .NET Standard so that you get that class library working in both places. We think that's very valuable. So what should you target? Well, if you're sharing code between .NET Framework and other platforms, .NET Core, Xamarin, .NET 5, continue to use .NET Standard. You should use .NET Standard 2.1 if you're sharing code between Mono, Xamarin, and .NET Core 3.1, 3.0. It's less relevant with .NET 6. When we get to .NET 6, you may have a very good upgrade path from .NET Standard 2.1 to .NET 6. Otherwise, use .NET 5.0. Use Net 5.0 for all your code moving forward. This way, you end up with a nice, very clear set of packages, set of applications that all use the same target framework. So we did release Visual Studio 2019 16.8. That went to general availability in November. There is a 16.9 preview. I think we're out to preview 3 is available at this point. These versions include .NET 5. They're in .NET 5 is in the box for you. In the box, right? We'll air quotes that. All kinds of .NET productivity enhancements, IntelliCode team completions. There's a new Git experience, better Linux debugging, improved XAML experience, GitHub Actions in Visual Studio. There's even a prototype Razor editor in there that you can turn on and you can start interacting with. If you're building with Blazor, you'll be able to get a little bit better experience with this, but it's not fully optimized yet. It's still growing, it's still being tuned, and you're going to be able to give feedback on how that's working when you use this new prototype editor that you can opt into when you install the preview version. Check it out, the new version of Visual Studio at visualstudio.com/download, or you can get the preview version at aka.ms preview. I personally always run the preview version, never have a problem with it. It runs great, and you get a new version about once a month or so as the team completes new features and is ready to roll them out, start getting feedback. So always great to see. Now, if you're building Windows desktop applications, we've got a great experience for you on .NET 5. There's a complete development experience because we now have finished, totally available Windows Forms and WPF designers inside of Visual Studio. It was kind of a hack to get that working with .NET Core 3.1, but now everything works just the way you would expect it, very tightly integrated with the .NET 5 experience. Great Visual Studio tooling for you. Click once, installer support. Click once is back. Third-party tools and controls all work with .NET 5, Windows Forms, and WPF. And you get all the great benefits of .NET 5, self-contained single-file EXEs. You don't have to ship a complete version of the .NET Core framework with you when you go to deploy your application or have it already installed on the machine. You can package up just those pieces of the framework you need and have them shipped as part of the EXE. Works fantastic. The best performance of a Windows application, whether it was written with .NET Framework, .NET Core, .NET 5, you're going to get the best performance out of your interactions, as well as modern controls like WebView 2, the updated web browser component that Edge uses, and you're going to be able to use to build modern applications that allow you to browse the web and have a great experience. Now, you can still build full stack .NET web apps, and now even more with Blazor in .NET 5, because .NET 5 now has Blazor WebAssembly in the box. It's no longer a side add-on that you had to go and download after you got .NET Core 3.1. So Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly both work great for you. WebAssembly enhancements include .NET Core framework libraries are being used. No longer are we going to be using those mono libraries. So you had a slightly different experience, slightly different performance or syntax. Now everything is the .NET 5 core framework libraries for Blazor. This means it's also 3 times faster than the previous release. And you're also going to be able to get server-side pre-rendering when you deploy your Blazor application with an ASP.NET Core server, as well as lazy loading dependencies. Don't load up everything right away. Just load those things when you need them, when folks get to the various parts of your application. Virtualization is a tremendous feature that is now in Blazor that allows you to take a grid, take a list, and give it that forever scrolling, right? The infinite scroll capability so that folks are always scrolling and getting new content added to the screen. And Blazor will only add that content to the screen when it's needed as it's being scrolled into view. CSS and JavaScript isolation so that any scripts, any styles that you need for your components, for your pages, are only activated when they're being referenced inside those pages. There's a couple new components available as well, and a growing ecosystem of third-party open source controls and tools. We're seeing this grow by leaps and bounds. All the control vendors have a very rich control set available for you if you want to go and buy a pre-made control set, component set that's going to deliver a great user interface experience with no effort on your part. Love having that available to us. We talked about C# 9. Let's take a look at some of the new features of C# 9. Let's do some demos from the C# with C# Fritz show that I do on Monday mornings. Let's take a look at what's new here and how you can use these in your applications. So I'm going to switch over to my browser. I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code, and let's take a look at a couple of quick demos here around some of the new features that are available. Now, the first feature I'm going to talk about is records. So we've always had typically two object types that you could use, right? Value types, reference types. And our value types were typically built with structs, right? If you had to create a custom value type, you created a struct and you had value types like int, long, bool, character, these things, right? Bytes, doubles, singles, right? So now with C# 9, and reference types, of course, were classes, right? So, and classes were always managed on the stack instead of the heap where the value types were. So what if we wanted to create a reference type that had a lot less ceremony and was immutable by default? That's what a record is. Record is a reference type that has inheritance capabilities, has a couple of features that are generated for you on the fly by the compiler, and is immutable by default. Let's take a look. I have a couple demos written up here. First one I want to show you is we can create a class, a person class with a constructor that looks like this. And I can create a record that looks a little bit similar, right? So I have a person, let's call this should be person class. And I have a class object that looks like this. No big deal. Okay, that kind of makes sense. A property, and a toString method, and a little constructor here that's going to receive two arguments and decompose that into these two properties. Pretty cool. Okay, I get it. If I scroll down here, I can create a record with very much the same syntax. It looks like a class. And with this syntax, I've actually overloaded, and it's not immutable, but it is generating for me automatically toString, get hash code, these things that I would normally interact with. It also generates the equality comparison. So I have the ability to create and use this syntax, and they're pretty easy to understand and follow. I can actually, if I create two person records, right? A person class looks almost the same, but I can create these two person records. And if I let that run, you'll see that they're actually not equal. They're not the same. They're value type equal, but they're not the same. There you go, right? They are equal in that they have the same two values. Now, I can turn this around also, and it does generate where a class doesn't have and let me comment this out. A class doesn't have a toString method that it'll write out for us, but it does write out just the override that I put there of first name, last name. If I turn that into a record, we can see what it generates for us. I'll save that, and the .NET Watch is going to rerun it real quick for us. And you'll see that it generates person. It shows me what type it is and what each of the parameters are. Okay, so I'm seeing a little bit of value by using a record type and getting equality, getting some toString that looks a little bit easier for me to manage. Certainly when I'm looking at the debugger, that's going to be a little bit cooler to work with when I want to sniff around and see what's going on inside of my objects in my application. Let me go to the second demo that I have here, and I can show you a little bit about inheritance with records. So when we talk about inheritance, we can do it with this new syntax for record here, public record, and this is called a positional record because we actually declare this so that it looks like a constructor, and it will generate properties for us for each one of these objects, each one of these parameters, I'm sorry, that are defined on the record. So I've defined a record called cool person with a first name and last name, and if I instantiate one using the new cool person constructor, I'll get that same type of string being reported. But I can also inherit from cool person. So I'll create a rockstar record that has also a band name additional parameter here, and I'll inherit from cool person and pass along those two parameters into the cool person object. So now when I run this, and I'll actually create a rock star, I'll show my age and I'll create Freddie Mercury, save that, let this rerun, and you'll see that it generates a cool person, Jeff Fritz, and a rock star, Freddie Mercury. Okay. Now, we can also cast things back and forth here if we want to. So I can jump down here, and I'm not sure why I said it would be R, and I can see it cast that rockstar object back to a cool person. You'll see I still get it though outputting as a rockstar. Even though I'm using it as a cool person, that toString method still recognizes it has all the objects to it, and I can report out everything about it. But I'm working with it as the base type. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, a little bit of gotcha that might behave a little bit differently than you might expect from working with classes. So let me now talk about deconstruction and cloning. So when we're working with our content, if I create a new cool person, I can deconstruct that cool person object into its positional properties, first and last, and I can get the information back from it and write it out first, last, and you see it here. So my properties are returned in the same order that they're declared. And this is a little bit of why it's called positional. And they're immutable, right? This is where, by default, the simpler syntax of a record, this isn't going to compile. Sorry, that property is immutable. You can only, because it's a positional record, you can't change the object. But with a record, we can clone it with a member-wise clone and using this with syntax to replace the properties appropriately in our new copy of the object. So if P was our new cool person, Jeff Fritz, and I can write out now S, which is a new cool person. It's cool person P, but we're going to swap out the first name and assign Scott. So there's Scott Fritz, and the second one, there's Jeff Fritz. Okay, now we're talking. All right. I like things that are immutable. It gives me good feelings about performance, that I can discard things quickly and not be churning through memory as much as I might in working with large classes and large object graphs. So that's records. Next feature that I want to show you is init-only setters. So what's going on here, the idea with this is you might have a class or a struct that has an, let me hide that. Right, here's a struct for a log entry that has severity, timestamp, a description toString. And when you create a new log entry, well, gosh, if I have to make these, I didn't reset this. If I have to make these get sets. And now they're open for modification by anybody, right? Anybody can go through and create a log entry and change it after the fact. I'd really like these to be read-only like this, right? So that they're only set in the constructor, but that doesn't work because I want to be able to also have this rich initialize format, right? I don't want to just have to create a constructor with syntax for every one of my properties and do that goofy, right? Initialize the property into a field and return that field in these properties, right? Or have the read-only properties assigned directly out of the, it's ridiculous. I want to give the flexibility so that maybe you don't want a constructor and you want to be able to define these at initialization time. And that's where the init keyword comes in. Using the init keyword makes these read-only, and they can only be set either in the constructor or in the initializer like I have here on lines 19 through 21. And you see I'm creating a new log entry and I'm writing that out and everything comes out properly. The init keyword works in classes and structs. I believe it also works in records, so that you can provide this flexibility so that you end up with a read-only series of properties on your objects, but you can initialize them in the constructor or in an initialization sequence like we have here. How are we doing there, chat room? Haven't heard anything from you. Chime up there. Let me know what's going on. Let me know any questions. Let me know that I get into here during our discussion. The next feature that I want to talk about is something that is actually a little bit controversial. Folks looked at this initially and they said, why do I need that? That's not something that's going to be valuable to me. But the more that folks tinker with this and they know that this is available, the more that they actually get in and say, all right, now we're talking. And that's top level programs. So to write this console application, I had to provide a namespace and a class, static void main, string, array, arguments. Okay, I get it. What if you could just write a file? Just write a file and say write line, or hey, go get this NuGet package and do this thing out of it. Just something quick and output some data to the screen or perform a quick task. I don't know, initialize a CSV or a database, load up something. So BikeBite says the record syntax is useful. Oh yeah, I agree, BikeBite. I like being able to create those POCO objects, right? Those plain old CLR objects that are just the left-right property code that I'm carrying some data from my database. I'm going to drop it over here in my website, and I don't need all that ceremony. I can do it with a record, easy. Or going the other way, I can create a view model that doesn't have any business logic in it. It's a carrier that's being verified inside my ASP.NET application. Just turn it into a record. I don't need all the ceremony of all the other goo around it. Go load it in and we'll verify it once it arrives over on the server. So absolutely. What do we got here? They probably don't have accounts. You had to sign up. Okay. That's cool too. Yes, that's right. Twitch is free. So let's talk about top level programs. We can make this real easy. I'm going to comment out this entire file. Comment it out. There it is. And I have another file here that is ready for writing just some simple code in C#. So I could write, right, I could do system console write line. This is a top level program, and that'll run. Not wrapped, it's not a class, it's not in a namespace, just works. It's nice to have the using statements around it to make things a little bit easier to read. And I can include references to my other classes, my other libraries with other using statements. That works just fine. There are arguments that it will run, that it will pass around, that you can interact with. So, wrong delete key. Right? So I can do things like this and actually inspect the arguments that are passed in as a string array. They're available to you as a string array called args. And I can call into my other classes and interact with them. So there's my demo 3 that we just saw with Scott Fritz that we were creating. So that's cool. That's easy for me to build and understand. I create a 1 or 2 line CS proj file here, right? That just defines this is an exe with .NET 5 and drop a CS file and put 2 or 3 lines in here that reach out and call some business logic, do something simple. You know, if you want to test something, you want to write a quick test that runs with .NET Watch like I have here on the command line. And as you're tinkering, see it rebuild and run and execute and deliver some output. It's a simpler, faster way to run some tests and see some output. It's also a low impact way to teach folks about .NET features because they don't have to get into all the object-oriented minutia while they're trying to learn and get into .NET. It's an easy way to start up and not have some of that impact. So let me head back over to the slides. Let's talk about some more of what's going on in .NET 5. .NET 5 is available on Azure App Service. It was released day of, and it will be going forward. Every version of .NET will be available on Azure App Service on launch day. More information about how you can get early access to app service features, all the cool stuff going on Azure App Service at aka.ms/app-service-early-access. Really great stuff out there. I'm a big fan of using Azure App Service. Let's talk about Blazor. Blazor in .NET 5 is easily one of our most popular frameworks that we've built in years. So many people are excited about Blazor, but we moved forward with Blazor thinking about 3 main themes. We wanted to improve the developer experience, make it more interesting, more fun, and give you a better experience building Blazor applications. We wanted to make it faster to build with WebAssembly, and we wanted to improve the performance for your web application users as they visit and work with your Blazor WebAssembly applications. And there were a couple feature gaps we wanted to fill. A couple things that we felt were missing that we wanted to make sure were in the box so you had great support for those features on .NET 5 and going forward. So I want to show you 1 or 2 new features that are new in Blazor for .NET 5. All kinds of new features are in there, though. CSS isolation, auto refresh. There's a bunch of checks that pop up here. Auto refresh is great when you're doing, just like I was doing there in Visual Studio Code, the .NET Watch run experience. As you change code, the browser refreshes. I'll show you that in just a second here. Packages will auto add their own CSS and JavaScript. Automatically gets deployed and available inside your projects. There's a much better debugging experience. There's now an input file, a file input control that you can use to upload files to your applications. Virtualization so that you can have a virtual application, a virtual list that just has that infinite scroll capability to it. And of course, this is my favorite feature right here, Azure Static Web Apps. You can build a Blazor application with WebAssembly, build it like a single page application, and for all the data, for all the remote procedure calls that it needs, it carries along with it Azure Functions that you can execute and interact with directly from your Blazor application without having to configure cores, cross-origin resource sharing, and all the goo back and forth so that all of your requests are secure interacting with the function. So let me take a look over. Let me walk you over to a application that I've been building over here on Visual Studio 2019. This is called ClipTalk. This is an application that I've been building that's based on the Azure Static Web App configuration, and it allows you to interact with Twitch clips as in the same way that you would other social media websites with likes and comments that you can click through and interact with those clips. And it presents those as a virtualized list that just scrolls forever. So let me show you this, and there's some pretty interesting source code in here that I want to show you. This source code is not available, but I'll show it to you here, and you're welcome to take screenshots and copy some of it out. This is one example of it, but yeah, we'll go with this one. So this is the virtualization component right here being used. So what this is it will take a collection of objects, and I call this discoverable clips. You see, this is a collection of clip objects. And what it will do is it'll effectively wrap whatever's inside of the virtualized tag with a big for each statement. It's behind the scenes, but it effectively does a for each on this. Now, I'm creating a cascading value and passing some data through, but I have a component that I created called clip that generates the appropriate media player and preview picture for that clip that we're passing in. So I have this collection of clips, and just like with any other component, I have a context that specifies, well, when we do the for each on the IEnumerable of this, what's the variable for that thing, that instance that we're getting out of the for each? So for each of these discoverable clips, I get an object called clip. I'm passing that into this component called capital C clip. It's my clip data, so it knows how to format and present that information. I have another attribute here to control. Does the user want it to start when they scroll and that clip comes into view? And I can show you, if we jump down into this clip component, you'll see it put it over in that panel, not where I wanted it. There we go. All this does is it creates a div and shows the title, a link to the actual clip itself, so we can get a full page with comments and those types of things on it. Below that, there's a div that actually is the player, and it has a video player that it embeds, and it has a little status bar that goes underneath of it, so we can see how many times it's been viewed, how many times it's been liked or commented on. So this is very interesting. This is a Blazor static web app. It has this API project that comes with it, and I have a functions class here that has Azure Functions in it that define, here's how to go get the clips, or here's how to get the clips that I like, with a little bit of code that defines how to interact with a database and return that data. But it's being returned as an OK object result. So it gets serialized to JSON, and I present it on screen. So there's two parts to this application. There's the API, those Azure functions. So I'll run those, and this starts up in the Azure function emulator. We'll see this give me some data here in just a second. There it is, Azure function tools. And we should see in just a second. There we go. Here's a list of some of the functions that are in there. I'm going to minimize this and bring over my Windows terminal here. Let me open a new one, and I'm going to go into, and I know it's not on screen yet. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go into the right folder here. There we go. And I mentioned that we have this great new refresh experience when you .NET Watch run. So for this Blazor application, that it's a Blazor static web app. It's WebAssembly. I'll .NET Watch run. It'll compile, and whenever there's a change, it'll recompile and refresh my browser. Now it opened just off screen there. I'll bring this over, and we'll see there's my screen loaded with some of the top suggested streamers out on Twitch. So let me go find somebody. Well, you know what? Let's just go look up my channel. We'll look up C# Fritz, and that pops up here. And there's my channel. And here's some of the clips that have happened on my channel. And it loaded this all up with, great speed. It's bouncing off of those Azure functions, and it's this virtualized list. If I scroll really fast, takes a second and loads up and shows me what's there, right? So it doesn't have everything, but I scroll and it refreshes and it shows some of my content. Great, not bad. All right, I got it. That's what virtualized does. All right, all right. Now, what about the refresh experience, that ability to change code and it refreshes the browser? So let me go back over to Visual Studio and let me show you inside my client application. Let's go over here to the layout, right? It's in my shared, and I have in the corner here, let me bring this over here. I have in the corner, I have a little public beta label, right? See it up here, public beta v013. Let's change that. Let's make this version 9.99. Save that, and you'll see it saw a change and it's rebuilding. Over here, if we take a look at the the console, right? File changes detection, waiting for application to rebuild, and it's already relaunched. It's rebuilt, relaunching the application, and it's going to have my changes in the corner there after it's done loading data. There you go, public beta version 9.99. Now I just changed some text, but if you change something inside of any of your Razor files, inside of any of your class files, it'll automatically do this rebuild and redeploy and relaunch in your browser while you're using that .NET Watch run statement. We think this is going to be a much better experience for folks that are building user interfaces, and they need that real quick. Let me change a little bit of content and refresh the browser, and it does this for you in just a matter of seconds. So you should have a much better building, testing, and hopefully deploying. Deployment happens through a GitHub action. Everything gets wired up between a GitHub action and your Azure static website. So as soon as you commit changes into your main branch, master branch, if you still have it named that, it'll automatically deploy that to your production space out on the Azure static website. All right. Let me head back over to the slides. Let's talk through a couple more things here, and then I think we'll wrap up. Yeah, after a couple more slides here. So that was some of the new things that are going on with Blazor. Also, something we've been experimenting and we're pushing through a little bit more on is something called ProjectTie. Now, ProjectTie lets you build, debug, and deploy microservices faster. Service discovery with configuration conventions. If you've been building microservices that need to connect to each other, interact, you need to pass along, well, what's the namespace? Where does that domain name for those other services live? Some sort of discoverability thing so that you can inject it, have it delivered, and load up appropriately inside that network of microservices that you have available. Well, ProjectTie ties all those together and gives you these configuration conventions so you can just refer to things and they start up and they get connected automatically. You can add dependencies to other Docker containers easily without having to write additional Docker files. So Redis, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, you name it. You can add those extra services by just adding references inside your Tie config. Additionally, Tie's been built so that you can run and debug locally using Docker containers and Kubernetes running on your desktop. That's great. That's something that is going to make me feel more assured that it looks like and scales like a production space. You get a great local dashboard for metrics, logging, debugging using ProjectTie, so you can see what's going on inside of it, but the interactions between those various containers as you're working. And finally, the biggest thing that we think is most valuable, you can automatically Dockerize, containerify, I think that's a word, and deploy to Azure Kubernetes service. And you'll have the expectation that what you built locally matches what you're deploying out to Azure. We've updated Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms 5 is available. You're going to get beautiful designs with brushes, shapes, and paths. control templating for native controls. There's an improved XAML experience for working with Xamarin Forms in Visual Studio, better hot reload capabilities, and you can also develop iOS apps directly on Windows. Xamarin Forms in Azure is a great experience. Governments, healthcare, and others have been rapidly creating secure applications specifically to help address the COVID-19 crisis, to be able to iterate quickly and get productive. In Japan, the Japanese government built an open source contact tracing application. You can learn more about that at github.com/COVID-19radar/COVID-19radar. Really great stuff to see .NET and Xamarin on the front line helping deal with COVID-19. So let's talk about the .NET release schedule. What's this mean? What's going on moving forward? So .NET 5 was released in November 2020. You're going to see major releases every year in November. .NET 5 is an odd-numbered release. That means it's a current support version. You're going to get support up to 3 months after the next version is released. This is to allow you to test and work with the framework so that you can be sure everything works great before you commit to that long-term support release. You can experiment with some of the new features as they're coming out as well. So long-term servicing comes in the even-numbered releases. So .NET 6, .NET 8, those versions, long-term support where you're going to get 3 years of support, free support from Microsoft. The big thing that this gives you, though, is a predictable schedule, and minor releases are issued as needed. Something comes up, something we need to address, something that wasn't in the plans that we need in .NET now. We can issue a minor version that will appropriately support that and allow you to continue moving forward with growth. All right, I think that's where I wanted to stop today. I haven't seen too many questions there. How we doing? I think I see something down here from, let me see. Come on, move that up there. There we go. From Bike Bite says, that's really cool. We're still on .NET Web Forms, but hope to migrate to Blazor someday. So funny you should mention that. I actually helped write a ebook that you can find on the .NET documentation. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com, heck, let's bring it up. Let's just jump right to it. Docs.microsoft.com, and it's an ebook called Blazor for Web Forms Developers. There it is. And this has, you're not gonna give me the front page of this, are you? I'm gonna have to jump in, and no, you're not gonna give me the front page of this, are you? Maybe? Nope. Nope, that's not the front of it. Wow. And now I feel shame. It didn't jump to right where I thought it would. It's in the architecture guides, which I don't see. Blazor for Web Forms, there we go. There it is. .NET Application Architecture Guide. Let me post this in chat for you. Sorry, ASP.NET, not .NET. Right, ASP.NET. Yep, there it is, ASP.NET Web Forms. So, right, this will give you some of those comparisons between what works in web forms and how it kind of maps to Blazor. Not just kind of, how it really does map. How you can build components, how you can take your pages and convert them to Blazor pages. And I've even got some links in here that point to an open source project that the community is working on called Blazor the Blazor Web Forms components, which try to generate Blazor components that have the same names, the same features as the Web Forms components. So you can migrate all your markup by just changing a little bit of content in there and getting it to work and deliver the same business value with minimal changes to your application. So we think that's kind of important to help folks get out of web forms, get into Blazor, so you can take advantage of containers, take advantage of Linux and Mac development, and be able to adapt and use use Blazor on all the cool new environments where it's available. All right. I'll stick around for another question or two if there are any. So, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me. There's the .NET schedule. My name is Jeff Fritz. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, of course, right here on Twitch, GitHub. I am C# Fritz in all those places. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me here today.